Jeff, thank you for joining us this evening. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, and thanks for having me. So my name is Jeff Sternberg. I am currently the head of data science engineering at Blackstone, which is an alternative asset manager you may have heard of. We do private equity, real estate, and other kinds of alternative asset investment. My interest in data science started about, 6 or 7 years ago when I was at S&P Capital IQ, which is now named something else, Market Intelligence, I think. And I had been doing a lot of database programming and product development in a fintech environment, and discovered this cool world of data science, and really fell in love with it. And I got my start in technology in kind of a weird way. I did not study it in college. I was not a computer science major. I did like programming when I was a kid. But when I got out of school, I wound up doing a lot of graphic design work because that was kind of something I knew how to do. And I worked at a catalog company, and we had to do all these like image processing routines. And I decided I needed to script, right? I needed to automate these image processing routines. So I learned AppleScript. So I think I'm probably the only like professional data scientist right now that got his first like professional start using AppleScript, which I still love.
Yes, thank you. My name is Bruno Skap. I'm a co-founder of Business and Technology of Greater New York. So what are the most important decisions you make as a data science leader for your organization?
Yeah, it's, well, data science is still a relatively new concept. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot of, ideas kind of going out there. I think in many cases, team formation is probably the first step. And something that we think about a lot. Blackstone's data science effort is relatively new. It's less than a year old. And so we think about like who's the right person for which type of project, and how to set up an environment where people can collaborate together effectively. Data science is multidisciplinary. You have elements of statistics and mathematics and engineering and software design and visualization and domain knowledge. And it's really important, I think, to think about how to plug those pieces all together and to fit them all together. So we think a lot about that. Another thing we think about is it's very easy to kind of fall into the sort of allure of AI and machine learning and big data, and kind of think about the shiny, cool toys and fear of missing out and all that stuff. And I think in practice, there's quite a lot of data science work that is much more accessible. Sort of regular SQL, right? Regular databases can get you really far. When it comes to machine learning, regular regression is a pretty powerful technique. And having conversations with, sort of analytically inclined people, right? Is often kind of the core thing that needs to happen. So, we really optimize for communication, for presentation, for listening skills, for storytelling, that kind of stuff. The rest of the sort of headline, AI, sophisticated techniques, kind of let that sort itself out. Sure.
And what are the biggest challenges facing data science leaders today?
Yeah, there's lots of challenges because it's a new field, right? Sure. Back to that. In many cases, businesses will want to be interested in, or they have management teams that are interested in adding data science, and they don't really know how to go about doing that, right? They don't know how to put the pieces together. So, and that can range from, sort of the conceptual understanding of what a machine learning application can do, or what a visualization can do, all the way to just kind of like, we don't know where our data is, and we don't know how to understand how to get it, and it's sort of the more tactical kind of nuts and bolts. Yeah. So it's it's lots of challenges related to kind of initiating the process. And that's what we see a lot.
Yeah, being a new field, like you said, probably creates even more
Yeah.
kind of.
Yeah, and again on team formation, sort of the press. If you read the press, is like find these unicorn data scientists that know all of these different skills. That's the idea, right? The sort of the cool, sexy job, right? And in practice, I think that is really it's obviously really difficult, right? Unicorns are extremely rare. And so, what I like to think about is how do we put the team together? How do we have someone who has maybe a statistics background connected with someone who has an engineering background, and the stats person can really think through, a numerical approach, and the engineering person can think through like how to ship it or how to productionize it. Or how to use Git for version control and things like that, And so I think, you kind of need a minimum of 2 or 3 people to really get started with it, with data science.
Sure.
Yeah.
What advice would you give someone going into data science leadership for the first time?
Yeah. So the big thing is, be a practitioner, right? If I'm a firm believer in order to lead, you kind of need to know the subject material, and you need to have been there and really have developed empathy for sort of the difficulties and the rewards and the challenges that come through doing data science. So, if you're currently in like a software role or in a technical role, there's lots of ways to kind of build that expertise sort of on the side or as you're doing your work, whether it's through using Google Analytics in a cool way that you haven't done before, or taking a class online, or all these like kind of data science boot camp kinds of things if you want to get really into it. And I think that's important to have that sort of foundation for a while, and then once you develop that empathy, then you can. Then I think it's much more to be. It's much more easy to be a collaborative leader, right?
Yeah, sure. And what are you doing to ensure you continue to grow and develop as a data science leader?
Yeah, it's. I think that the key word for that is variety. Make sure that I try to make sure that I'm not focused too deeply for too long on any one project or any one skill. I like to have variation in the types of things I think about, right? I also think it's pretty important. I would say I'm a little bit of an outlier on this in the technology field in general. That technology leaders, I think, should code to a certain extent. And I think you find a lot, or to a certain extent, and as long as possible, right? Is maybe another way to say it, or as much as makes sense. I think you find a lot of like CTOs and CIOs and VP of engineering that are solely focused on team management and personnel development, which I think is fine. But my preferred approach is to try to be a committer, right? Be a collaborator on the code. And even if that means, take a really like mundane task off the backlog, right? Or something that is just like, sort of something you kind of know how to do, but you can learn a little bit as well, and you don't have a lot of, you feel that there isn't a lot of energy on the team to do that thing, but it needs to be done, right? And it's a coding task, and maybe it's like, a lot of copy paste, and you feel like you're back in the college or something, and you're just like cramming to get something done. I think that's actually really helpful to do that kind of work, even as a manager, because it's you develop your skills and you develop that empathy, and if you're in there coding, there's a chance that you will mess things up, but I think there's less of a chance in data science, frankly, than there would be in some of the other software fields. There's a lot of, I think data scientists value multiple perspectives And so the worst case scenario is you'll sort of present an analysis or present an approach that the rest of your team is like, well, Jeff, you didn't really think of that, and that exogenous, events or whatever. And so you'll learn in the process, and then you'll also, develop that empathy. So I'm a big believer in the doing and leading at the same time. And I try to do, 20 to 30% of my week, kind of hands-on work.
I've heard a lot over the years how people are saying you don't have to be technical to be a technical leader. So
yeah.
I'm really curious. Obviously, I agree with you, but
well, that's good.
Have you found people? Is there resistance when you talk to people on your level or your bosses?
Sure.
What is your experience with people accepting this
yeah,
sort of argument?
It can be difficult. I think, like I said, it's a little bit of an outlier perspective. So I would say probably very much an outlier perspective. I would say most technical leaders are, focused on being a person, a people manager, and thinking about vision and strategy. And I think that stuff is obviously incredibly important and super valuable as well. So yeah, and I think a lot of it depends on the scope of your team and how you organize and how many layers there are, and how efficient your organization is in kind of making sure that processes work. If you have to spend a lot of time, getting people access to data, or sort of worrying about kind of the administrative aspects of people management, then it's going to be really difficult to do this kind of carve out some time. But another great strategy is just cancel a bunch of meetings. Or just block your calendar for 3 hours and okay, I'm gonna have focus time, and during the 3 hours I'm gonna go away from the floor for a little while and do some coding. Laptops are really helpful for that. So yeah, it is difficult though, because you can't lose sight of the overall team vision, right? You can't do that because you can't do that in spite of coaching and mentoring people or thinking about recruiting or hiring or giving people feedback. That stuff has to happen. Sure. So you can't slight that.
Yeah. What is one of the biggest IT and data science challenges you have faced, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story about when I first started doing data science in a corporate setting. And it was in a software development team that was largely using sort of traditional database technology and traditional software development technology in kind of the Windows, .NET framework ecosystem. This would probably equally apply to Java Stack stuff as well. But I learned about data science, I learned about Hadoop, I learned about big data, distributed processing, and there was no way to kind of start experimenting with that stuff, right? At the time, even just installing Hadoop on Windows was impossible, if not extremely difficult. And so, we literally didn't have any Linux servers in the shop at all. And so it was the beginning of the cloud, and I said, hey, why don't I try AWS? And of course, also that wasn't a thing at our company. So, I literally went in there and signed up for an AWS account, and I plugged in my corporate travel and expense card as the billing card, which is probably a big no-no. It definitely was a big no-no. But I sort of took a bet that would be kind of okay as an experimental thing. I could kind of control the cost a little bit. I could get started and prove the value of it. I like the sort of the Pythonic approach of it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? So exception handling in Python is kind of built that way. So what you want to do is realize that you can't get yourself fired when you do something like that, but there's a little bit of risk that you can take to kind of get through that sort of IT restriction, right? And I think data science in particular struggles with this quite a lot because data scientists are trying to constantly be creative and pull in different data sets and go over here and do a different technique, and we're very curious about the world, right? And we're very inquisitive, and that tends to run up against IT process, especially in larger companies.
Yeah. If there is one thing you could change about your IT environment, speaking of, what would that be?
So there's a lot of things, but these days, fast forward, I think actually security is, and I would add into that, information security, not just like, cybersecurity, but like thinking about privacy and GDPR and all of that kind of stuff. I feel like it needs to be simpler to be secure and be correct with privacy, with personal information, than it is to be incorrect, right? It's like the default should be everything is encrypted. Passwords are impossible to enter in to a tool that without sufficient complexity. And in general, a lot of the software, I think it's changing, but I think a lot of software is kind of oriented the other way, where it's like you have to work harder to do the security stuff. And so, I think that's an area that I think we really need to focus on.
And what about the people side? Or do you find it always seems, unless you educate everyone, they just do the least resistance thing and
right.
Yeah. So
right. Well, I mean and that's human nature to a certain extent, right? So you want to make it, as system designer, as leaders, as process designers, you want to make it, easy for everyone to be lazy and secure at the same time, right?
Yeah. Is that possible?
I think it is. It's just code, right? It's just technology. I think it's about thoughtful design. Maybe a good example of this is I've heard recently that like Google Cloud Platform is encrypts data at rest by default. Like you don't even have the option to not encrypt data at rest. That's just kind of how they built it. And of course, Google is smart. They're smart people. So but I think it's I think that's an example of what would be if everyone sort of thought that way in systems, then it would become wouldn't really be as much of an issue.
Yeah, that's true.
And, maybe working with data sets, if everyone sort of naturally had that kind of like, sort of gut reaction that, sending around a data file with social security numbers in it is like not a good idea. And it's not, maybe like the email software shouldn't even let you do that, right? Or, Excel shouldn't let you do that, or whatever it is, right? That would be fantastic, because those guardrails being in place, we want to make it easier to be correct instead of not.
Right.
When it comes to security, especially.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, AI can be used for that, right? So, how does Excel know that a column of information is a social security number column? You can sort of look at the label, right? But that's, maybe spotty.
It needs the list of all the numbers.
It needs examples, right? And it needs to be trained, and then supervised machine learning can be employed to do that. And there are companies and startups that are like trying to attack that problem, right? How do we sort of the auto PII finder, right? And that should just be kind of baked into the software. That's pretty cool, AI sort of data science self-reference.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And in your experience, how do you think IT can do a better job of making its top management aware of how it's adding value?
Yeah, so from a general perspective, stepping broader than data science, I think the technology teams generally need to do a really good job and be really thoughtful about understanding the business that they work in. And I generally am speaking from the sort of, medium to large, right? Obviously, if you're a 3-person startup, you don't have this issue, right? But it's pretty common for a software team to be populated with people who are, who really want to just focus on building software, or a technology team to be populated with people who want to engineer technology and not really want to really pay attention to what's going on with the rest of the business. And for good reason, right? They're not business, they're not trained in business. They're not going into, they didn't get MBAs or whatever. But, I think as leaders, of technology leaders, I think we need to make time and promote the use of learning about the rest of the business and engaging, at multiple levels through the team, right? So, whether that's like setting up lunches or like sort of, sessions, knowledge sharing sessions, inviting leaders, middle managers from the rest of the business in to talk to the tech team, inviting, and vice versa, inviting people from the technology team to talk to the business, and really just like setting up situations where people can like cluster in groups and talk with each other, and they realize that that's a good way to exchange information, right? Rather than just via email or over a web portal. I think that's a really good thing to do, right? To promote that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, so creating some mechanisms in real life for people to meet and.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be only in real life too, right? You can have, again, the IT team is in the position of being able to be thoughtful about collaboration software, right? And using, Slack and other tools and being, open to people talking to each other through those things.
Sure.
But yeah, nothing is better than the face-to-face, right? I guess that's why we're all here.
Exactly. If you could see 5 years into the future of technology, which one action would you recommend to your CEO?
I mean, that's an easy one for me because, invest in data science is probably the one I would pull out. And maybe to expand on that a little bit, it's not just in investing in data science, but investing in data and understanding, that the information that your company manages, in many cases, is an extremely valuable asset. It potentially as valuable, if maybe even more valuable than some of the other assets that you spend a lot of your time as an executive worrying about. And that can take a lot of form. It can take the form of using your own information better, curating it better, enabling and empowering the people in your organization to make data-driven decisions more easily, treating it with kind of the respect that I think it deserves. Now I'm personifying data, right? So don't insult your data. That's really mean. But so I think just being aware. I think first of all that the information that's coursing through your business is really important. And then even carrying that further. So how can we monetize that? How can we really turn that into a revenue producing concept, right?
Yeah.
And I think data is an asset class, just like fixed income or equities. And I think we're in the early days of the marketplace for data.
Yeah, exciting.
Thank you. I think it is.
If you don't mind, we can open it up to questions.
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Does anyone have any questions for Jeff?
So typically data is in silos across the organization, and getting access to that data can be politically challenging, technically challenging. Can you speak a little bit about some of your experience with that?
Yeah, it's, I agree. In fact, I've had more than one position in my career where I was supposed to be the guy that came in and fixed that. And, it's really difficult to do, right? I think, again, I would say it starts with kind of that human connection, right? It's much easier to convince someone to get you a data set if you bring cookies to them or, have met them in real life or whatever. So, there's that human connection, and I think that is super important. And then, I think there's also a technology thing there which is that the reason for those silos in many cases is that, it's a security provision, right? You've got your HR data over here, and you've got your, transaction data over there, and so if we had better security tools, going back to what I was saying earlier, if it were easy to ensure the information flow or the provenance, right? If the data owner said, okay, I can tell where this data goes and what its lifespan is, they would be much more inclined to kind of sort of let it go a little bit further, right? But since we don't have those tools, in many cases, what happens is you have to have an engineering project to sort of package up a little chunk of it and anonymize it and then ship it over, and then now you've got requirements going back and forth, and now, and then pretty soon people sort of give up, and that's, it's frustrating. Hopefully, this is something that we can attack from both sides, though, from both the technology angle and the kind of the human angle.
Hi, I just have a quick question. So, big data analytics and AI and machine learning are still emerging technologies. So, from your perspective, how do you kind of identify these are the areas for my company? I'm going to look into for this year or year after. In terms of how do you go about approaching it from the process perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I feel really lucky to be at Blackstone, where we are, part of our team's mission is connecting with our portfolio companies and engaging with them to help kind of answer a lot of those sort of data questions, like where do I apply data science, or how do I think about this data problem, or maybe even here's a problem and we think it might be data related, help us vet it. So we get a lot of incoming use cases, right? We get a lot of incoming requests for projects and for help, and we're starting to sort of synthesize common patterns, right? There's sort of themes that emerge from that each data set, each data project is unique, but but there's some commonality across them. And I actually think that, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier, in many cases, it's not the sophisticated deep learning AI solution that's not the first thing to worry about. The first thing to worry about is, is there a way to apply data to this problem that we haven't thought of before, or that that it's been difficult to apply? And let's think about that first. Have you guys ever seen that pyramid of needs of data science, where the AI is at the very top and then bottom's I think that's incredibly powerful. If you can normalize, right? If you can divide a count by a total and get a percentage, now you've produced a pretty interesting thing, right? And so, I would say, starting simple is really the key.
Sure. Hi. So this is especially interested in your thoughts about this from the perspective of the fintech or professional services world. But, a lot of times in data science, we find ourselves needing to speak about the reliability of what we're producing, of the algorithms that we're producing, right? And that, there can certainly be people who say the more complex the model, the more it relies upon, the less likely we are to trust it versus our gut or the simple heuristics that we've done in the past. How do you sort of, as a process, go about figuring out how to answer those questions and get it so that the amazing things that you're building can actually be used in production?
Yeah, that's another good question. I think so. So what is using a data science project in production? Oftentimes that's a little bit under the covers, right? Especially from a fintech. It used to be when I first started working at Capital IQ, that there was no autocomplete search, right? You would type a keyword or a term, right? I want to look up Microsoft's, balance sheet in our terminal, right? So you type in Microsoft, and you have to type the whole thing out, and you click go, and then you get a list of results back, and there was no like sort of type ahead or autocomplete. And that just didn't exist. And then we started building those things and getting better at trying to say, okay, well now this is a pretty interesting data problem of like, ranking the first 5 search results, right, out of that big collection. So I think the way that I would think about it, especially in product development, is like it's just another technique to build good features or good experiences. And so it's not really a different thing, like using a machine learning approach. It's not really that different than writing down a requirements doc. It's just that you're building the requirements doc from data. And getting people over that hump is hard. But once they're there, they're kind of like, I'm good,
Hi, I work in advertising, which is a lot of client-facing work. And a lot of the times I find that the bulk of my time is going towards storytelling, given a lot of data, help us find anything interesting.
Right.
How do you go and approach that problem? Because it seems like from what you were talking about getting people up to a certain data literacy, that it seems like you do a lot of that kind of work as well.
Yeah. It can be challenging. I think the techniques that have worked for me, or teams that I've worked with, have been to try to really construct the story the way you would a narrative, right? Like a creative piece of creative writing. So like, what did you learn in school? It's like there's the 3 points. There's the introduction, the 3 points, and the summary, right? And each point gets you like a paragraph. So like, what are the 3 points? Let's start with that. Like, how can we break out the story into sort of digestible chunks? And then for each chunk, have a really tight way to kind of describe it in just a sentence or two, using common language, I guess, right? Especially when your audience is non-technical, or especially when they're skeptical of the approach. But it's difficult, right? And sometimes it's just not there. Sometimes the story is just not there, right? And like you just sort of have to fess up to like, okay, well, let's move on to let's try to write a different story, a different project, because like, you don't need to keep going with stuff that doesn't work.
Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.